Hi, thanks for watching. Today we're going to talk about, I think it's pretty fair to say, the biggest series of the coming 6 months or so, which is the Australia Home Ashes. This preview is going to be a little bit different than my normal previews. Normally I talk about one team first and then the second team, and I try and make them about 10 minutes long roughly. This will be, I imagine, a bit longer than that. We're covering 5 test matches, so it seems appropriate. I actually wrote a written preview, which is very, very long for those that have read it, about the Ashes in England. I'm not going to do that again because I wrote it only a matter of 5 months ago or so. Um, but if you want to check that out and other stuff, you can go see my blog. And I don't have the intelligence to be able to put my blog at the bottom there, but it's clwalcott.tumblr.com if you want to check it out. Okay, so the Ashes, so we're going to talk more of a stream of consciousness. I'm going to talk on some of the main themes that I see in this series. I do have my normal assortment of stats that we peppered through, but it might be quite as neat and tidy as my normal previews, but that's okay. So hopefully you're here for the rant. Okay, so let's look at these Ashes. Now, I want to look at, obviously we're talking a lot about the Ashes that were in England. A lot of Australian trash talking. I think it was George Dobell wrote an article on Cricket Info about how Australia won the propaganda war. I think it's absolutely correct. Shane Warne was on my television screen constantly saying how defensive England were and how England needed to do this and England needed to do that. England didn't need to do anything. England were winning the series if no one noticed. England won it 3-0. Now, let's do a quick little autopsy of that. While people were like, oh, it was really close, yes and no. I mean, I think 3-0 was probably a fair estimation, considering that England were the only team that could have won the final test, despite people making this as Clark did this wonderful gesture. Well, yeah, then he was making sure they got off the field to get the draw. So it was a wonderful gesture while Clark was hoping to win. When on the draw or losing was a possibility, Clark suddenly was looking for the light, which everyone is. There's a weird fetish around Michael Clark's captaincy, which I don't understand. But England were maybe not on top the whole test, but certainly it was an even money test. The third test, sure, Australia were better. I'm still not confident they could have won that test, even if they did get a final display. We've seen England salvage draws against New Zealand really well. They're good at doing that. They bat very deep. We'll cover this as well later on. So I'm not sure that it was the lay down misère that everyone thinks it was to Australia. Certainly they had the better of the match. It's fair. They also won the toss. It was a big toss to win. Usually is at Old Trafford. So yeah, certainly they were better of that draw, but they were far closer than they were far further away than the scoreline indicated in Trent Bridge. The 12-run loss was thanks to 228 runs from their last wicket. So when you take that into account, that 1-0 should have been a comfortable victory, or at least a semi-comfortable victory for England by say 80 to 120 runs. Absolutely demolished them in the second test. Absolutely killed them by 300 odd runs in the second test. Third test, Australia had the better of a draw, but not massively so. England showed a really good result, batted a lot of overs. Cook will come to later on and talked on the blog about Alistair Cook's ability to stay at the crease. And again, England fight better than Australia. What's Australia to present themselves as tough battle cricketers? England played well when their worst was relatively good compared to Australia's. Fourth test, even money-ish game, but I mean Australia collapsed. England won by 80 odd runs, 60 odd runs. A tightish victory, but not one that was stunningly so, or Australia were robbed. And then the last test, which was basically an arm wrestle. So 3-0, here or there, it was fine. And I think that Australia were deluding themselves into thinking they had the better of the series, or even an even-handed element of the series. And again, this negative stuff, it's like Australia's just bad losers, basically. And they've lost a lot against England recently. Now, this has gotten kind of lost in the shuffle, but Australia hasn't beaten England consistently for a long time. In the last 15 Ashes tests, the last 3 Ashes series, Australia's won 2 tests. No one's really mentioned this. They've won 2 tests. They haven't won any of their last 9 test matches. Okay, and if you discount the Sri Lanka one where they were missing Wellagadera and they were missing, obviously Malinga as they always do, but they were missing Zoyser as well. They're missing like guys that they tend to go to, Fernando or something. They end up with like their 4th to 8th string pace bowlers. Kulaseka was out. 4th to 8th string pace bowlers from the worst pace bowling team in world cricket. And even then, like to be down to that point in Australia, Sri Lanka were not in great shape. Leaving those to one side, they haven't won any of the last 12 against South Africa, in India and England. So Not a good team. Okay, Michael Clark wouldn't a captain, not winning test matches, not getting particularly close to winning test matches, maybe aside from the first test against England. Got killed in India, absolutely slaughtered in India. Um, so Australia haven't won test matches for the last 9, and besides Sri Lanka, the last 12. England, on the other hand, have not lost in 13 test matches. So, I heard a lot at the end, and 6 of those are on the road. A lot at the end of that series, but well, look, it's real quite close, and wait till they get to Australia and all that kind of stuff. They're not winning this series. Okay, they're going to win. They're going to have to win at least 2 of the 5 tests to win the Ashes back. England hasn't lost any of the last 13. Australia hasn't won any of their last 9. Australia's won 2 of the last 15 times these teams have met. They're not beating them twice in 5 tries. So you can throw that out the window. So I want to get that off my chest. That was really irritating me. But looking at those last 15 matches, I want to have a look at what Australia do when they don't play a pace bowler versus when they don't play a slow bowler versus when they play all pace attack. Or I think I butchered that as well. When they play a slow bowler or when they don't play a slow bowler. When Australia play a slow bowler, they have not beaten England in the last 3 Ashes. They've drawn 5 of those matches and they've lost 6 of them. Have not won in 11 tries playing a slow bowler. They are 2-2, 2 wins, 2 losses when they play 4 pacemen. Now, obviously, they're playing 4 pacemen on tracks that suit pace bowling. I appreciate that. But that's still a stark number, I think. And I find it particularly irritating, again, if you look at the 2009 Ashes series in England, the one that's the third of the 3 I'm talking about. Everyone always blames on the Oval not playing Nathan Horrocks. I mean, this is seriously a critique that people in Australia level at that team, which is absolutely absurd. Like, Stuart Clark got him back into that series, and to go that if we played Nathan Horrocks we would have won the Ashes, woe is us, is absolutely ridiculous and betrays a level of ignorance in cricket in Australia. And the fetishization, again, of playing a slow bowler. Look, there's just no one that's good. I've done the Nathan Lyon thing. I'm not going to give you another Nathan Lyon rant. But those numbers speak for themselves. They haven't won in 11 test matches playing a slow bowler. They've won their only 2 test matches out of 4 games when they've played the 4 pacemen. Australia will again feel some really good pace attacks here. Australian came out today with an idea of what the pace attack's going to look like. Their guess was Johnson, Siddle, and Harris, and Lyon. Sure. Mitchell Stark's been treated very tough by the Australian cricket establishment, and he's a project I've never actually given a proper go to see whether they want him or not. I'm on the fence too, but I think you either play him or you don't. You don't keep picking him in and out. But anyway, Ryan Harris obviously had a great series against England. He's actually had a great career when he's been on the field. 5 wickets a match at 21.45. 7 of his past 16 matches have been against England. All his 16 matches have been against the English. So Ryan Harris, good, basically. And I mean, that was reinforced in that series. Can he stay on the park for 5 test matches? Well, we'll see. Certainly, it's fair to have a fair bit of scepticism about that. Their other fast bowlers, again, will be good. We'll talk about England pace bowling in a second. Well, we'll do it sort of now. I want to talk particularly with a bit of a spotlight on Stuart Broad and Graham Swan. Jimmy Anderson's going to be fine. His solo is probably the most consistent. Every ball is pretty good bowler in world cricket. I have no concerns about Anderson, nor do I necessarily have concerns about Broad or Swan, but they didn't play well out here in the last Ashes. Stuart Broad's career away from England is very disturbing. He averages 14.88 with the bat and 37.06 with the ball. He's a terrible player away from England historically. So that's an area that Australia might be looking at. I'm quite positive on Stuart Broad in this series. I was going to the previous Ashes series. I thought he had a great series. I think he's actually going to revel in being the villain, and I think he's in the prime of his career. Physically, he's in his prime, and a great series against Australians before. I think he's going to have a big series, but he's an important player. England need to strike with that new ball. Obviously, in Australia, new ball is always important, so he'll be an important factor. In the previous series, the one in England, the last one that just went a few months ago, Broad averaged 25.57 with the bat, a real return to form, which is important, and 27.45 with the ball. So he might not be able to replicate those numbers in Australia. There'll be tougher times than they faced in England, I suspect, but he should be able to average 30 or the good side of 30, I think. The batting is particularly important, and it was another subplot that really went unnoticed in that previous Ashes. Was England got their tail back. They got their tail back. Swan and Broad, and particularly Broad, have really been languishing with the bat for some time, and it was great to see them come back into form. Graham Swan had a really big series. It's interesting to note in the last Ashes in Australia, Graham Swan took 3 wickets a match at 39.8 in the last Australian Ashes. Very poor numbers. The reason why England were able to get away with all this relatively mediocre bowling is they scored an absolute monster level of runs. I mean, the batting series they had in Australia was absolutely outrageous, particularly when you consider that they fell apart in Perth against Johnson. And Harris, actually, I think there were the two bowlers there. So again, they come back, and there might well be a test like that again, where Australia's new ball bowling. It certainly didn't quite show up in England to the full degree, which is surprising. I suspected there would. I predicted there would be one test where their fast bowling just ripped through England entirely, and that might happen here. For one test, but besides that test, they absolutely dominated. They absolutely dominated. To give you some idea, here are some of the numbers in that Ashes series from the England bats. Alistair Cook averaged 127.66. He scored in 71% of his innings. Had a century every 2.3 innings. Jonathan Trott, we'll talk more about Trott in a second. 89 with the bat. 42.9% of his innings he scored, and 3.5 times he came to the crease he scored a century. Ian Bell, obviously a big name in the last series, averaged 65.8. Had basically the same series he had in England, although the runs in England were more important. The 65.8 scored in 66.7% of his innings. 2 out of 3 innings he went to the crease, he got 50 or more, and got a century. Kevin Peterson also got a century, averaged 60. Matt Pryor, who had a terrible series in the England series recently, averaged over 50, scored in 1/3 of his innings, and scored a century. In all, England scored 9 centuries in that series. 9 centuries. And 20 scores in 5 tests in the previous Ashes. An absolute mountain of runs. So if you are concerned about Cook or Bell reproducing that form or Trott coming back, and I have some concerns there too, don't get me wrong, got a great track record in Australia. You certainly can't point to them not performing in Australia because basically all their batsmen have. They only bring out one new face, which is Joe Root, and possibly Gary Ballance. And we'll talk about Gary Ballance in the context of Jonathan Trott. Jonathan Trott, I have real concerns about. I'm not so worried about Cook. Cook averaged 27.7 in the Ashes over in England, but did score 3 times, and there were important scores. I mentioned earlier about Cook's ability to play well when he's not playing well, to occupy the crease, to see off new ball overs, to build partnerships, to bat well, guy to bat well with, tends to be involved with a guy who goes on to make a decent score. I'm not worried about Cook. He's got a super track record. He's got more centuries than anyone who's ever played for England. So, Alistair Cook, unlikely to be concerned. If he has if he has that same series again in Australia, at that point I might go, oh shit, maybe we need to look at Alistair Cook. Jonathan Trott, though, is a different kettle of fish. Jonathan Trott has averaged, average in that series, averaged 29.3 with only 2 scores. Now, again, those numbers look similar to Cook, but since the 20th of July in 2011, that's the end of the India series they played at home, Jonathan Trott's averaged 38.3, 29.4% scoring, and only 3 centuries, 1 every 17 digs. That actual period where Jonathan Trott has been a mediocre, very fringy test player, not just number 3, test player, full stop, is actually longer than the first half of his career when he was eating planets and looking so amazing. Consequently, there's a lot of concern about Trott. Trott's also not that particularly young. He's about 31, 32 off the top of my head. So I'm concerned about Trott, and I think that if Trott starts poorly, I'd even go as far as say, even if he doesn't make a century in that first test, although I don't think this will happen, but maybe for the first 2 or 3 tests, I think you could see Jonathan Trott dropped in this series. I think that would be a perfectly reasonable decision if he starts poorly and is averaging 25 or so. He just hasn't been very good for over 2 years. And considering that he was only coming to cricket in 2009, there's not really a reason to be too faithful here, particularly when you've got someone like Gary Ballance on the sidelines. The first-class record for Gary Ballance is absolutely superb. He's only 24 years old. He's averaging 54.51 in the strongest first-class competition in the world, scoring in nearly 40% of his innings, hitting a century every 5.6 innings. So Gary Ballance is a superb talent. Very unlikely this guy won't be able to perform in a pretty big way. Probably 45 plus, I would suggest, is almost the floor for Gary Ballance. Consequently, there's every reason to try and force him into the team. Let's look back to Australia. Michael Clarke, 104.94 average in his last 2 home seasons. Last 12 matches in Australia, Michael Clarke is averaging 104.94. He has 6 centuries and 9 scores in 19 innings. So every half the time he goes to the crease, he gets a score. 1/3 of his innings he gets a century, and that includes three double centuries and a triple century. He is a good player. This will be a concern for England. He did not really come off in England. I suspect he'll have at least a big series, at least a 50-plus series. Yeah. The support around him, of course, is always going to be the issue. We've covered a lot of guys like Warner and Watson to death. So I want to look at some of their sort of bench options here. We looked at the bench options for India when India had this old rotting batting card, and they brought him in and they've been really good. Who are these guys for Australia that haven't played Test cricket? Who could be the guy? Because we've looked at Khawaja, and I don't mind Khawaja so much, but the other guys, Hughes, Smith's got a very low ceiling, as hard as he plays. Alex Doolan is sort of the safe pick. Alex Doolan is a 38 average first-class player, so he'll probably be not awful, but not Test class probably. And he's sort of older, I think he's at 28, 29, than the other guys. He's one option they've got. Nick Maddinson and Joe Burns are sort of in the middle, and then at the other end is Jordan Silk. These are sort of the big four newcomers, I would say, for Australia. Jordan Silk's very young. He's got a centre on debut. A lot of hype around Jordan Silk, but probably not going to see in this series. Joe Burns and Nick Maddinson both were on the A Tour. I'm actually surprised that Joe Burns in particular hasn't played Test cricket just yet. He's been one of the best state players in Australia for quite some time. He's played about 25 odd first class matches, which isn't too bad for Australia. And I think you might see one of those guys play. One guy you almost certainly will see play is George Bailey. George Bailey has been asked to sit out of the first round of Shield matches, which apparently is going to get in the Test squad. Bailey's first class numbers are not great, and he's played a lot of matches. He's played 96 matches. He averages 38.29. To be fair, that's come up in recent times. He's been a little bit better, but 96 matches is a lot, especially in Australia. He's 31 years old. He averages 38.29. That's not great. As most of you probably are aware, he's been killing it in one-day cricket. He averages 53, over 53 in one-day cricket. Only one century, mind you. What does that tell you? I don't know, in all honesty. It does tell you that he's placed some world-class bowling, although he's been in India, which hasn't got a lot of that recently. I'm sceptical, but in all honesty, Australia probably could do worse. They don't have a lot of really good options to go to, so I can understand going to Bailey. We'll have to see how it works out. But I do think you'll see a debutant from that other group of four. Maybe not so much Silk, but Doolan, Maddinson, and Burns. I think there's a really good chance that one of them, particularly Burns, could play by the end of this series. I've got another little stat that's sort of hanging over here that doesn't really have a place to go. Bresnan's average in Australia in the last Ashes was awesome. 23.66 batting with 24.33 bowling, so another possible weapon there. England's new ball against Australia. This was an interesting thing. We talked about Australia's fast bowling earlier. England's new ball batting, this is when they're batting, averaged 2.2 wickets for about 80 runs, 79.8. Which isn't great. They lost 3 wickets a lot. They never lost more than 3 wickets, which is interesting. And again, that's Cook's value. Australia knocked on the door almost every single Test match. They knocked on the door of that new ball, which is everything to them. It's how they can possibly win is with the new ball. But they never could quite get in. And that might be different. As I say, I suspect it probably will be different. It surprised me that it wasn't different in England. I was surprised that Australia didn't burst through for one Test match. I thought that England would win that series 3-1. So I think you'll see that happen here. Australia needs to happen twice, and then also their batting to hold up as well. Look, I can throw everything out at you, but I think that the number I put at the very start of the preview says everything you need to know. Australia hasn't won in 9 Test matches. England hasn't lost in 13 Test matches. Last 15 meetings in their sides, Australia's won 2 of them. They're not going to win this series. What's the score going to be? Look, draws tend to be a little bit less common in Australia than England, a little bit less weather, probably. So, look, 3-1, I picked that for the England series. I think it looks right again here. I don't think Australia's as close as their media is pretending that they are. I don't think the home conditions are going to matter that much. England got plenty good fast bowling. Brought a lot of tall guys, get to bounce. We'll see how that goes. It is a bit experimental. Injuries are always an issue touring, so that's another thing it's a possibility for England. It's a long series, which also probably exacerbates that fact. They've got some injury-prone guys. Anderson always looks like he's close to an injury. Swan's coming off an injury. Cook's got a bad back, I read the other day. But balance is sort of a secret weapon, certainly for their batting. I expect them to bat a lot better. Look, I'm going to say 3-1 out there. I think I've talked enough about it. Look, I hope you enjoy the Ashes. And visit my blog. I'll give another little spruik. CL Walcott, CLWALCOTT.TUMBLER.com. Thanks again for watching and enjoy the Ashes, guys.